wasn't the pain that broke me. It was the sound my knee made when it hit the hardwood, this dull, hollow crack that everyone heard but nobody acknowledged. My stepfather's hand was still extended, palm flat, the way you'd shoo a stray cat off a porch. And the worst part wasn't even him. It was my mother sitting 3 feet away, looking down at her cranberry sauce like it had suddenly become the most fascinating thing in the room. Let me back up. My name doesn't matter for this story, but for the sake of you understanding, I'll tell you my mother started calling me Birdie when I was 4 because I used to hum constantly. By the time I was 28, nobody called me Birdie anymore. They called me by my full name, Renly, and they said it the way you'd say a foreign word you weren't sure how to pronounce. I work in financial compliance for a regional bank in Charlotte. It's the kind of job where you spend your days reading other people's lies, looking for the patterns underneath. People think it's boring. I think it's the most honest work in the world because numbers don't have feelings. Numbers don't have feelings. Numbers don't pretend. My father died when I was 19. Pancreatic cancer. He went from a man who could lift me onto his shoulders to a man who couldn't lift his own coffee cup in 11 months. My mother held it together at the funeral. She held it together for about a year and a half, and then she met him. Roland Whitfield came into our lives at a grief support group at the Methodist church my mother had started attending. He was a widower, he said. His wife Patricia had passed 2 years prior, breast cancer, very sad, very tragic. He wore cashmere sweaters in the fall and had this way of putting his hand on my mother's lower back when they walked together. Possessive, but soft enough that you couldn't quite call it possessive. He had a daughter named Sutton from his first marriage. She was 23 when I first met her, and she had the kind of confidence that comes from never having been told no. Her hair was always perfect. Her teeth were too white. She called my mother Mama Helene within 4 months of meeting her. I should have known then. I think part of me did know. But grief makes you stupid, and watching my mother smile again after 18 months of watching her stare at walls, I didn't want to be the daughter who took that away, so I let it happen. I came home for Thanksgiving the next year, and there was Roland carving the turkey at my father's place. I came home for Christmas, and there was Sutton wearing my mother's pearl earrings, the ones my father had given her on their 20th anniversary. I came home from my mother's wedding to Roland 8 months after that, and I gave a toast about how love finds us when we need it most. I cried real tears. I met some of them. I want to be clear about something. I'm not a saint. I'm not the noble victim in this story. I was angry. I had been angry for a long time, but I taught myself over years of compliance work that anger is a tool, not a feeling. Anger is information. Anger is data. You don't act on anger. You file it away, label it, and wait. This past Christmas, I almost didn't go. My boyfriend at the time, his name was Matthew, and he was a perfectly nice tax attorney who eventually decided I was, quote, too quiet to read. Matthew told me to skip it. He said, "Birdie, you come back from these things looking like someone scooped out your insides." But my mother had called me 3 times that week. She said Roland was making prime rib. She said Sutton was bringing her new fiancé, a man named Garrison Pierce, who worked in private equity. She said it would mean a lot if I came. I went. I drove the 4 hours from Charlotte to the house outside Asheville on December 23rd. I brought wine I couldn't really afford and a Christmas gift for my mother, a first edition of a poetry book she'd loved as a girl. I had hunted that book down for 3 months. It cost me almost $600. The house had changed. I noticed it as soon as I pulled into the driveway. New landscaping, expensive landscaping, the kind that requires a service to come maintain it weekly. New pavers. A second car in the garage that hadn't been there in October. A dark green Range Rover with a temporary tag. I cataloged these things the way I catalog everything. Information, not feelings. Inside, my mother hugged me too tight and too fast, the way she did when she was nervous. Roland gave me a one-arm side hug and said, "Renly, sweetheart, you look tired." Sutton was already there, draped across the live seat in cashmere in a pair of leggings that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Garrison stood up to shake my hand. He had a handshake like a wet napkin. Christmas Eve dinner was fine. That's the thing nobody tells you about families like this. Most of the time, it's fine. We ate, we talked about nothing. Roland told a long story about a golf tournament. Sutton showed everyone her engagement ring, which was, I'll admit, beautiful. Garrison drank too much and laughed too loud at his own jokes. I cleared the table. I loaded the dishwasher. I went to bed in the guest room, no longer my old room, which had been redone for Sutton when she visits, and I lay awake listening to my mother and Roland argue in low voices through the wall. I couldn't make out the words, but I heard my mother say, "She's going to notice, Roland," and Roland said, "She's not going to notice anything. She never does." That was the first warning bell. I tucked it away. Christmas morning. Stockings, coffee, a slow opening of presents that took 2 hours because Sutton documented everything for her Instagram. My mother loved the poetry book. She actually cried, which surprised me. Roland gave her a tennis bracelet that I knew, just by looking at it, cost somewhere north of $15,000. He said, "Only the best for my Helene." My mother pressed her face into his shoulder, and I watched her and I thought, and I'm being honest here, I thought, where is that money coming from? Roland was retired. He'd been in commercial real estate, whatever that meant. He had a pension, and he had whatever he'd inherited from Patricia. My mother had my father's life insurance and the house, which was paid off. They lived comfortably. They did not live tennis bracelet and Range Rover comfortably, but Christmas morning isn't the time for math. So I tucked that away too. Christmas dinner was at 3 in the afternoon. My Aunt Marigold flew in from Tampa. Her son Brennan came with his wife and their 2 kids. My mother's best friend Delphine and her husband Curtis came over too, the way they did every year. Plus me, my mother, Roland, Sutton, and Garrison. 11 of us around a table set for 12, because my mother had set a place for my late grandmother, which she did every Christmas. A tradition she and my father had started before I was born. I sat down at my usual place, the chair to my mother's left, the chair my father had sat in when he was alive, the chair I had sat in for 28 Christmases in a row. Roland walked in carrying the prime rib on a silver platter. He set it down at the head of the table. Then he looked at me and his face did something I'd never seen it do before. It went still, empty, like a screen between programs. He said, "Sweetheart, that seat is for my real daughter." I didn't move at first. I thought I'd misheard him. I said, "Sorry." He said it again, louder, slower, the way you talk to someone hard of hearing. "That seat is for my real daughter. Get up, please." I looked at my mother. She was looking at the cranberry sauce. I looked at Sutton. She was smirking, not even hiding it. I looked at my Aunt Marigold, who had her mouth open, and Delphine, who was reaching for Curtis's hand under the table. I stood up slowly. I said, "Roland, there's an empty seat right there." I pointed to my grandmother's chair. He said, "That seat is reserved. Move." And I want you to understand, I wasn't going to fight him. I was going to move. I was going to take the empty chair and eat my prime rib and drive back to Charlotte that night and never come back. That was my plan. I had already decided, but I was too slow for him. He stepped forward, put his hand flat against my shoulder and pushed. Not hard exactly. Hard enough. I went sideways into the chair. The chair went sideways into the floor, and my knee hit the hardwood with that sound I told you about. The hollow crack. Nobody moved for a full 3 seconds. I counted them. I counted them because I needed something to count. Then Sutton said, in this airy little voice, "Oh my God, are you okay? Daddy didn't mean to push that hard." That's what unlocked something in me. Daddy didn't mean to. The casual way she said it, the total absence of surprise. She had known. I stood up. My knee was bleeding through my tights. My mother finally looked at me. She said, "Ren, sweetie, just take the other chair. Please don't make this a thing. Don't make this a thing." I picked up my purse. I picked up my coat. I walked to the front door. Behind me, I heard Roland say, "Helene, let her go. She's always been dramatic." And I heard my mother who had carried me for 9 months and held my hand at my father's funeral and called me Birdie because I used to hum. My mother said, I know. I drove 3 hours that night before I had to pull over at a Cracker Barrel parking lot off I-77 because I couldn't see through the tears. I sat in my car and I cried for about 40 minutes. Then I stopped. Then I opened my laptop. Here's the thing about being a compliance officer. You learn how to find people, not in a creepy way, in a paper way. You learn how property records work and how LLC formations work and how you can trace a man's life backward through court filings and tax liens. You learn that everybody leaves a paper trail and everybody thinks theirs is hidden. I started with Patricia Whitfield, Roland's late first wife, the one he talked about so movingly in that grief group. I couldn't find her. Not a death certificate, not an obituary, not a marriage certificate to Roland. Nothing. I expanded the search. Patricia Whitfield, age range, geographic area. I found 3. None of them had been married to Roland. None of them were dead. I felt my stomach turn over. I dug deeper. Roland Whitfield, age 62, residency history. North Carolina, Virginia, Tennessee, Florida, Georgia. 5 states in 15 years. 5 different addresses. 5 different LLC formations, each one for some kind of consulting business that had no clients I could find. And then I found something that made me close my laptop and go back inside the Cracker Barrel and order pancakes I couldn't eat. I found a woman named Eleanor Vasquez in Roanoke, Virginia. She had filed a civil suit against Roland in 2013. She had withdrawn it 9 months later. There were no public details. But the case number was there. I drove home that night. I called in sick on December 26th. I spent 3 days, no exaggeration, 3 full days at my dining room table with my laptop and my work-issued database access and a yellow legal pad. By the end of those 3 days, I had 11 names, 11 women, across 6 states, going back 19 years. The pattern was always the same: widow or recent divorcee, some money, not enormous money, but enough. Roland would meet them in a grief group or a church group or a country club. He would marry them within 18 months. Within 3 years of the marriage, there was always some kind of financial event: a refinanced house, a joint investment in his consulting business, a loan against retirement. Then he would leave. Then he would surface in a new state under a slight variation of his name: Roland Whitfield, Roland W. Whitfield, R. Whitfield. Once, in Tennessee, just Roland. Sutton was real. Sutton was his actual daughter, from a marriage in Atlanta in the late 90s. But Sutton had been involved in the last 3. She'd been the one who befriended the target's adult children. She'd been the one who, and this took me longer to figure out, had power of attorney signed over to her in 2 of the cases when the woman in question got too sick to manage her own affairs. I want to tell you I went to the police that day. I didn't. I went to my supervisor. Her name was Marguerite, and she had been a federal prosecutor before she came to the bank. I told her everything in her office on December 30th. She listened without interrupting for 45 minutes. Then she made 1 phone call. Then she said, "Renly, I need you to drive to the FBI field office in Charlotte. I'm calling ahead. Don't talk to anyone else. Don't post anything. Don't call your mother." I didn't call my mother for 6 weeks. The FBI agent assigned to my case was a woman named Special Agent Rosalind Tremaine, mid-40s, gray streak in her dark hair, voice like a librarian who had seen things. She didn't act surprised by what I'd brought her. She said, "We've had a partial file on him for about 14 months. We had 2 prior victims who'd come forward. We didn't have what you have." What I had, and I'd organized it all in a binder because compliance officers organize everything in binders, was 11 victims traced through public records, plus Roland's current address, plus the financial pattern. What the FBI had was 2 cooperating witnesses and not enough to indict. What we had together was a case. Agent Tremaine asked me if I was willing to wear a wire. I said yes before she finished asking. It took 6 weeks to set up. In those 6 weeks, I did not call my mother. She called me 11 times. She left voicemails that ranged from angry to confused to pleading to angry again. The angry ones were Roland telling her what to say. I could hear it in the cadence. The pleading ones were her own voice. Those were harder. In the meantime, the family WhatsApp group, which my mother had created 2 years ago and which I had been trying to mute for 18 months, was on fire. Aunt Marigold had taken my side. She had called my mother that night after Christmas and told her she was a spineless, brainwashed embarrassment to my dead brother. Brennan had backed his mother up. Delphine and Curtis had quietly removed themselves from the group. Sutton had posted on her public Instagram a long passive-aggressive caption about estranged family members who try to ruin holidays for attention. It had gotten 300 likes. I read every comment. I screenshot every comment. I gave the screenshots to Agent Tremaine. In mid-February, I called my mother back. I told her I was sorry. I told her Christmas had been a misunderstanding. I told her I wanted to come home for her birthday in March. I told her I was bringing a peace offering. She cried. She said, "Bertie, oh Bertie." She hadn't called me Bertie in 9 years. The peace offering was a wire taped to my sternum. The wire conversation lasted 83 minutes. I have heard it played back in a federal courtroom, so I can tell you exactly how it went. It started with my mother and me alone in the kitchen, her crying, me holding her, me saying things I didn't mean. Then Roland came in. Then Roland did what Roland always did. He started talking. He could not stop talking. He told me in his condescending grandfather voice that he had saved my mother from her grief. He told me that the house was now in a joint trust that protected Helene, and that he had professional management of her finances now. He told me he had taken out a small line of credit against the house, which my mother didn't know about. He told me, and this is the line that the prosecutor played twice for the jury, "Look, kid, your dad left her exposed. I'm just doing what he should have done. The money's safer with me than it was with him." I said, "How much have you taken out against the house, Roland?" He laughed. He actually laughed. He said, "Don't worry your pretty little head about it. It's handled." It was $420,000. The house was worth $610. The federal indictment came down in early April. Wire fraud, mail fraud, identity theft, bank fraud across state lines, 11 counts, plus 3 more counts of elder financial exploitation that were added when 2 more women came forward after the initial press release. Sutton was indicted as a co-conspirator on 6 counts. She had been the one who handled the joint trusts in 3 of the cases. She'd been a notary. She'd notarized her own father's fraudulent documents. The morning the FBI arrived at the house outside Asheville, Roland had, and I learned this later from Agent Tremaine, 47 missed calls on his phone, from his lawyer, from his bank, from his brother, from a man in Tennessee who I later found out was another co-conspirator who got a head start. My mother answered the door. She was wearing the pearl earrings. I want to skip ahead to the part you probably want to hear. Roland took a plea. 16 years federal, no parole. He'll be 78 when he gets out. Sutton fought it harder, hired a fancy lawyer, lost, got 8 years. Garrison broke off the engagement in May and disappeared back into private equity. The house was a longer fight. The line of credit Roland had pulled against it was, technically, fraud. My mother's signature had been forged. The bank was furious. The bank's lawyers were furious. There was a mediation, which I attended, which my mother also attended, which was the first time I had seen her in 7 months. She had lost weight. Her hair was different, gray at the roots, and she hadn't bothered to color it. She wore a beige cardigan. She sat across the table from me and she said, in front of 3 lawyers and a federal mediator, "I'm so sorry, Bertie. I am so sorry." I told her I forgave her. I'm not sure I did. I'm still not sure. But I told her because she needed to hear it and because some part of me, the part that hummed when I was 4, needed to say it. The bank settled. The house was made whole. My mother kept it. She sold it 8 months later anyway because she said she couldn't sleep there. I helped her find a small condo in Charlotte, 15 minutes from my apartment. She moved in last spring. We have dinner once a week. She is in therapy. She is on medication. She is, slowly, becoming a person again. I got promoted at work. Marguerite recommended me for a senior role and I got it. Agent Tremaine asked me if I'd ever considered consulting on financial fraud cases for the Bureau. I said yes. I now teach a 2-week module at Quantico every fall on tracking long-con financial predators through public records. It pays almost nothing, and it's the best thing I do all year. Aunt Marigold and I are closer now than we ever were. She moved up from Tampa last year and lives 20 minutes from me and my mother. We do Sunday lunches. She holds my hand sometimes for no reason. She tells me my father would be proud, and I let her, even though I think my father would be sad first and proud second. Here's the part I think about most. That night at Cracker Barrel, sitting in my car at 1 a.m, knee still bleeding through my tights, I had a choice. I could have called the police. I could have posted on Facebook. I could have texted the family group chat. I could have screamed. I didn't. I opened my laptop. I started typing names into databases, and I want you to understand I didn't do that because I'm strong or noble or some kind of avenging angel. I did it because anger is information, anger is data. And I had been a daughter who wasn't listened to for so long that I had learned at some point to stop talking and start watching. There were 8 other people at that Christmas table. None of them stopped him. My Aunt Marigold told me later that she froze. Delphine told me later that she didn't know what to say. Curtis told me later that he should have stood up and didn't. My mother, who knew him best, looked at the cranberry sauce. Silence at a table like that isn't peacekeeping, it's permission. If you have ever sat at a table where someone you love was being humiliated and you said nothing because you didn't want to make it a thing, I want you to know that you made it a thing. Your silence made it a thing. The thing you became was a person who watched. I'm not angry about it anymore, or I'm trying not to be. My therapist says forgiveness is a practice, not a destination, and I'm practicing. But I will tell you this. The next time someone shoves a child to the floor at a holiday table, and it doesn't have to be a literal shove, it can be a comment, a look, a deliberate exclusion, say something, stand up, move the chair, make it a thing. The cost of making it a thing is so much smaller than the cost of staying quiet. I promise you, my knee healed. There's a small scar on the kneecap, about the size of a dime. I see it when I get out of the shower sometimes. I don't hate it. It reminds me that I stood up. My mother called me Birdie last week. We were unloading her dishwasher and she said, "Birdie, where do these go?" And I almost dropped a plate. She didn't notice. Or maybe she did. She handed me the plate and she squeezed my hand, and we kept unloading the dishwasher together. And outside the window of her little condo, the sun was going down over Charlotte. And somewhere, a man who had once told me I was not a real daughter was eating dinner off a plastic tray in a federal facility in West Virginia. I hummed a little while we worked. Just under my breath. It turns out I still remember how. I think about that hardwood floor more than I should. Not the bruise it left, not the scar on my knee. Those healed faster than I expected. What stayed with me is the silence. 8 people at that table, and not one of them said a word when I went down. My Aunt Marigold told me later that she froze. My mother's friend Delphine said she didn't know what to say. My mother looked at the cranberry sauce. And every single one of those choices, to stay quiet, to look away, added up to a permission slip Roland had been collecting from people like them for 19 years. That's the thing nobody tells you about predators like him. They don't survive because they're cunning. They survive because the rooms around them stay quiet. He had married 11 women across 6 states, and every single time somebody noticed something was off. A neighbor, a sister, an adult child, and every single time somebody decided it wasn't their place to say. He was just collecting silences, the same way some people collect coins. I used to believe that being patient was the same as being passive. I don't believe that anymore. There is a difference between staying quiet because you're scared and staying quiet because you're listening. That night at the Cracker Barrel, I wasn't being patient. I was being precise. Anger had taught me finally what it was actually for. Anger isn't a feeling you swallow, and it isn't a feeling you spray. Anger is information. It tells you exactly where the wound is and exactly who put it there, and if you can learn to hold it long enough to read it, it will hand you a map. I want to say something to anyone watching this who has been the kid on the floor. You don't owe your humiliation to the people who caused it. You don't owe a smile at Christmas dinner to the man who shoved you off your chair. The road back to yourself doesn't run through more swallowing. It runs through getting up, walking out, and refusing to confuse cruelty with family. That's not bitterness. That's self-respect. And to the people who weren't on the floor, the ones at the table, the ones holding their forks, the ones telling themselves it wasn't their place, I want you to know that it was your place. The cost of speaking up at a holiday dinner is awkwardness. The cost of staying silent is sometimes a woman losing her house, her savings, her sense of who she is. Make it a thing. Always make it a thing. The people who tell you not to are the ones counting on your quiet. What Roland did to my mother, he had done 11 times before. What I did at that Cracker Barrel parking lot he had not seen coming, because he had grown lazy on the silence of strangers. Cause and effect catches up. It is not magic, and it is not fate. It is just the long, patient arithmetic of every small choice we make. He chose to push. I chose to listen. And the math, in the end, did exactly what math always does. It balanced.